This is Ambrose Bierce's account of Day 2 of Shiloh, April 7th, 1862. He starts out, "This is a simple story of a battle, such a tale as may be told by a soldier who is no writer to a reader who is no soldier." About April 7th, he writes, "So the long night wore away, and as the glimmer of morning crept through the forest, we found ourselves in a more open country. But where? Not a single battle was here. The trees were neither splintered nor scarred, the underbrush was unknown, the ground had no footprints but our own. It was as if we had broken into glades sacred to eternal silence. I should have not been surprised to see sleek leopards come fawning about at our feet and milk-white deer confront us with human eyes." A few inaudible commands from an invisible leader had placed us in order of battle, but where was the enemy? Where, too, were the riddled regiments that had come to save? Had our other divisions arrived during the night and passed the river to assist us, or we were to oppose our paltry 5,000 breasts to an army flushed with victory? What protected our right? Who lay upon our left? Was there really anything in our front? There came, borne to us on the raw morning air, the long, weird note of a bugle. It was directly before us. It rose with a low, clear, deliberate warble and seemed to float in the gray sky like a note of a lark. The bugle calls of the Federal and Confederate armies were the same. It was assembly. As it died away, I observed that the atmosphere had suffered a change. Despite the equilibrium established by the storm, it was electric. Wings were growing on blistered feet, bruised muscles and jolted bones, shoulders pounded by the cruel knapsack, eyelids leaden from lack and sleep. All were pervaded by the subtle fluid. All were unconscious of their clay. The men thrust forward their heads, expended their eyes, and clenched their teeth. They breathed hard as if throttled by tugging at the leash. If you had laid your hand in the beard or hair of one of these men, it would have crackled and shot sparks. I suppose the country lying between Corinth and Pittsburgh Landing could boast a few inhabitants other than the alligators. What manner of people they were it is impossible to say, insomuch as the fighting dispersed, or possibly exterminated them. Perhaps, in mere classing them as non-saurian, I shall describe them with sufficient particularity, and at the same time avert from myself the natural suspicion attaching to a writer who points out to persons who do not know him the peculiarities of persons whom he does not know. One thing, however, I hope may without offense affirm of these swamp dwellers: they were pious. To what deity their veneration was given, whether like the Egyptians they worshipped the crocodile, or, like other Americans, adored themselves, I do not presume to guess, but whoever, or whatever, may have been their divinity whose ends they shaped, unto him, or it, they builded a temple. This humble edifice, centrally situated in the heart of a solitude, and conveniently accessible to the super-sylvan crow, had been christened Shiloh Chapel, whence the name of the battle. The fact of a Christian church, assuming it to have been a Christian church, given the name to a wholesale cutting of Christian throats by Christian hands, need not be dwelt on here. The frequency of its recurrence in the history of our species has somewhat abated the moral interest that would otherwise attach to it. Owing to the darkness, the storm, and the absence of a road, it had been impossible to move the artillery from the open ground about the landing. The privation was much greater in a moral than in a material sense. The soldier feels a confidence in this cumbrous arm quite unwarranted by its actual achievements in thinning out the opposition. There is something that inspires confidence in the way a gun dashes up to the front, shoving 50 or 100 men to one side as if it said, "Permit me." Then it squares its shoulders, calmly dislocates a joint in its back, sends away its 24 legs, and settles down with a quiet rattle, which it says plainly as possible, "I've come to stay." There is a superb scorn in its grimly defiant attitude. With its nose in the air, it appears not so much to threaten the enemy as deride him. Our batteries were probably toiling after us somewhere. We could only hope the enemy might delay his attack until they should arrive. "He may delay his defense if he like," said a sententious young officer to whom I had imparted this natural wish. He had read the signs, all right? The words were hardly spoken when a group of staff officers about the brigade commander shot away in divergent lines as if scattered by a whirlwind, and galloping each to the commander of a regiment gave the word. There was a momentary confusion of tongues. A thin line of skirmishers detached itself from the compact front and pushed forward, followed by its diminutive reserves of half a company each, one of which platoons it was my fortune to command. When the straggling line of skirmishers had swept 400 or 500 yards ahead, "See," said one of my comrades, "she moves." She did indeed, and in fine style, her front as straight as a string, her reserve regiments in columns, doubled on the center, following in true subordination, no braying of brass to apprise the enemy, no fifing and drumming to amuse him, no ostentation of gaudy flags, no nonsense. This was a matter of business. In a few moments we had passed out of the singular oasis that had so marvelously escaped the desolation of battle, and now the evidences of the previous day's struggle were present in profusion. The ground was tolerably level here, the forest less dense, mostly clear of undergrowth, and occasionally opening out into a small natural meadow. Here and there were small pools, mere discs of rainwater with a tinge of blood. Riven and torn with cannon shot, the trunks of the trees protruded bunches of splinters, like hands, the fingers above the wound interlacing with those below. Large branches had been lopped and hung their green heads to the ground, or swung critically in their netting of vines, as if in a hammock. Many had been cut clean off, and their masses of foliage seriously impeded in the progress of the troops. The bark of the trees, from the root upward to a height of 10 or 20 feet, was so thickly pierced with bullets and grape that one could not have laid a hand on it without covering several punctures. None had escaped. How the human body survives a storm like this must be explained by the fact that it is exposed to it but a few moments at a time, whereas these grand old trees had no one to take their places from the rising to the going down of the sun. Angular bits of iron, concavo-convex, sticking in the sides of muddy depression, showed where the shells had exploded in their furrows. Knapsacks, canteens, haversacks, distended with soaken and swollen biscuits, gaping to disgorge, blankets beaten into the soil by the rain, rifles with bent barrels or splintered stocks, waist belts, hats, and other omnipresent sardine box. All the wretched debris of the battle still littered the spongy earth as far as one could see, in every direction. Dead horses were everywhere. A few disabled caissons or limbers reclining on one elbow, as it were. Ammunition wagons standing in disconsolate behind 4 or 6 sprawling mules. Men? There were men enough. All dead, apparently except one who lay near where I had halted my platoon to await the slower movement of the line. A federal sergeant, variously hurt, who had been a fine giant in his time. He lay face upward, taking in his breath in convulsive, rattling snorts and blowing it out in sputters of froth, which crawled creamily down his cheeks, spilling itself along his neck and ears. A bullet had clipped a groove in his skull above the temple. From this the brain protruded in bosses, dropping off in flakes and strings. I had not previously known one could get on, even in this unsatisfactory fashion, with so little brain. One of my men, whom I knew for a womanish fellow, asked if he should put his bayonet through him. Inexpressibly shocked by the cold-blooded proposal, I told him I thought not. It was unusual, and too many were looking. This is Ambrose Bierce's description of the Battle of Shiloh, April 7th, 1862. All the pictures are from my Instagram friend, El Marcos, at Old Soldier 2020. His work is, as you can see, amazing.